Hi, it's Mrs. Mallet, and today we're going to talk about how to solve quadratic equations by the way of factoring. So in this example here, notice I have my quadratic. And remember, when dealing with quadratic equations, they've got to be written in standard form. And standard form is when they are set equal to 0. If they're not set equal to 0, make them be set equal to 0. My first example here, I already have it set equal to 0, so I'm good. Now we want to factor this. So look at this first part here and factor that. Okay, so remember, when we factor, we're going to have our two binomials here. So what two numbers multiplied together is 8 and combined to be 2? Okay, remember in factoring, right, your answer is going to be a positive 4 and a negative 2. Remember, if you need help with factoring, go back and review factoring in the earlier modules. Now notice we have two binomials here. Now what I like to, when I teach this, I always tell my students, you have your two babies. Okay, so now you have x plus 4, take that and put it equal to 0, and you have x minus 2, and you want to take that and equal that to 0 as well. Now you have your two babies, so now you can solve those for x. So how do I get x by itself here? I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides, and 0 minus 4 is negative 4, and over here I'm going to add 2 to both sides, so x equals 0 plus 2 is 2. So now your two answers for this is x equals negative 4 and x equals 2. Okay, let's try another example. Remember, when it comes to factoring, you want to factor them and get your two binomials together. Alright, so let's try another one. Let's say that I have x squared minus 5x equals 24. Okay, so now what do you notice about this one? Right, my side's not set equal to 0. So how do I alleviate that? Well, move your 24 over to the other side. So I'm going to subtract 24 from both sides. Now you cannot combine those because they are not like terms. So I have x squared minus 5x minus 24 equals 0. Now I'm in standard form. So now let's factor this. We want to look for two numbers that multiply together to get 24 and combine to be negative 5. What are your numbers? Right, 8 and 3. And to get a negative 5, my 8 has to be negative and my 3 has to be positive. Now we have this broken down with our two binomials, and now you take those, set each of those equal to 0, and solve for your x's. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides here, and I got x equals negative 3. And I'm going to add 8 here, and I have x equals 8. When it comes to solving quadratics by factoring, you take any method that we learned to factor and factor those and get them set equal to 0, and then you're going to solve. Okay, let's try another example. Okay, so let's say I have x times, let's say I have something that looks like this. How will we go about doing this one? The exact same way. First, we're going to distribute. X times 3x is 3x squared. X times negative 1 is negative x. And then I have my 14. Now remember, in order to get a quadratic equal to 0, you're going to have to move my 14 over. So I have 3x squared minus x minus 14 equals 0. And so now that I have this here, now we're going to factor this. Notice that we have to factor this using our tic-tac-toe method. Okay, so 3x squared is going to go here, and negative 14 will go here. And 14 times 3 is a negative 42x squared. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 42 and combine to be a negative 1x, our middle term. And what are your numbers? Right, they're going to be 7 and 6. Okay, so now let's fill in our chart. So I know that 3x times x is 3x squared. And now let's fill in the middle. 3x times what number is 6x? 2. And x times what is negative 7x? It's negative 7. So now this factors down to 3x minus 7 and x plus 2, and both of those equal 0. So now you're going to take both of those and set them equal to 0 and solve. So here I'm going to add 7 to both sides, and then I have 3x equals 7, and then I'm going to divide both sides by 3. So my answer is x equals 7/3. And then x plus 2 equals 0, minus 2 from both sides. So x equals negative 2. So your answers are x equals 7/3 and x equals negative 2. Remember, no matter how we learn to factor, you want to make sure that you factor your problem first. Actually, first you want to make sure that's set equal to 0. Then you factor it by any means necessary that we learned to factor in this module. And then from there, once you have your two binomials, set them equal to 0 individually and solve for x. We just solved quadratics by factoring.